Fun fact, did you know that the card Flame Wave has a guy surfing the wave in the artwork? Also, did you know that if Valakut Exploration gets destroyed, you get to keep the cards in exile forever? Valakut Exploration is a red 3-mana enchantment which, whenever land enters the battlefield under our control, exiles the top card of our library. We can play cards exiled by Valakut Exploration this way. Then, at the beginning of our end step, Valakut Exploration places all cards exiled with it in our graveyard and deals damage to our opponents equal to the number of cards put into the graveyard with it. By itself, Valakut Exploration is a mediocre card advantage engine. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. Without additional synergies, requiring a landfall trigger limits it significantly, since we'll have a hard time playing additional lands we potentially exile with it, which gives it a lot of misses. However, when paired with other colors, particularly with green, to increase our land drops per turn, Valakut Exploration can provide a fairly deep look into our deck. Big ramp spells like Traverse the Outlands or Boundless Realms become particularly silly with it, as they allow for 5, 7, 10 or even more triggers per turn. And then, at the end of our turn, the cards we didn't use become direct burn damage. That is, if we let them. An interesting quirk of Valakut Exploration is that it doesn't exile until end of turn. It just exiles, and then we can play the exiled cards. Unlike other impulse draw effects, it limits the timing of the exiled cards by manually placing them into our graveyard at the beginning of our end step. So let's say, if, hypothetically, something were to happen to it before that point, then that would mean the second trigger never happens and the cards stay in exile forever. And since those cards were exiled with an effect that says we can play them for as long as they remain exiled, we can then play those cards for the rest of the game. We can use this to preserve important resources that are essential to our game plan, or to transform Impulse closer to proper draw. Recently, I built an unhinged Wart the Raid Mother deck that's all about duplicating those aforementioned big ramp spells, which would regularly let me place 10 or more cards underneath Valakut Exploration, and then I Chaos Warped it from there, or just otherwise removed it, to keep access to my cards. Of course, while doing so I lost out on the end of turn damage, but those 10 cards often transformed into much more damage than Valakut Exploration would have done by itself. Another fun trick involving lands uses one of the nastiest removal spells in Commander. Imprisoned in the Moon is a blue 3-mana aura that turns a creature, land or planeswalker into a colorless land, while taking away all of its other card types and abilities. Imprisoned in the Moon is incredibly effective at taking out commanders, as it deals with them in a way that can't be circumvented by the command zone. A commander that's imprisoned in the Moon needs to have the enchantment removed to get out of the lock. Or do they? Imprisoned in the Moon turns the permanent into a land, which is interesting because of Vesuva. Vesuva is a land that enters as a copy of any land on the battlefield. The imprisoned permanent is a land, which means Vesuva can enter as a copy of it. But because this copy then doesn't have Imprisoned to the Moon attached to it, it stops being a land and just becomes the original permanent. This interaction isn't limited to Vesuva. It works with any land copy effect like Thespian Stage or Copy Land. If you use this to copy your own commander, you can even free yourself from Imprisoned in the Moon, because the legend rule will allow you to rid yourself of the permanent that's been enchanted. Just be careful that when you activate Thespian Stage, you give this video a thumbs up. That was awful. That was a terrible transition. Anyways, give this video a thumbs up and that you don't get the effect Stifle. I think Stifle is a surprisingly strong effect for Commander. Stifle is a 1-mana blue instant that counters target activated or triggered ability. Now, the card itself isn't actually all that great, because it's very narrow, but there are a bunch of alternatives like Consign to Memory, Disallow, or Nimble Obstructionist that come with additional utility that make them worth playing. A lot of decks rely heavily on triggering their commander's ability to get a snowball effect started. Stifling the first time Sir the Enchanter attacks is often the same as just making them skip their turn. A devastating interaction here is letting your opponent's Yorion flicker out their board only to stifle the return trigger, keeping everything permanently exiled. But my favorite use for stifle is in my Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath deck. Uro is a 3-mana 6/6 that draws us a card, gains us 3 life, and lets us play a land whenever he enters or attacks. This may sound insanely powerful, and it kind of is. Uro is a monster, but it comes with a caveat. When Uro enters, he sacrifices himself unless he escaped. We can escape him from our graveyard by paying 4 mana and exiling 5 cards. The intended gameplay pattern is for Uro to enter, do his thing, immediately die, and then we have to play him again later to actually get to attack with him. But we can circumvent this by stifling his ETB. Here's the dream scenario. Turn 1 land, Mana Dork. Turn 2, Uro. Uro then gives us 2 triggers. His enters, ramp and draw effect, as well as his self-sacrifice. We then stack the triggers so that we get to put another land into play first. With this, we place a blue land and then use our now available blue mana to cast Consign to Memory on the sacrifice trigger, countering it. That way, we get to keep Uro around on his first cast, which is incredibly powerful and can quickly end games by itself. This is possible with the other Titans as well. It just works much nicer with Uro because he gives us the land we need to cast the Stifle. Of course, also because he's the only one that's actually in blue. The Titans are generally very powerful, even when played regularly out of the graveyard, as graveyard recursion is always a useful effect to have. There are a variety of cards that let us play certain cards of another type out of our graveyard. For example, Hakon, Stromgald Scourge, allows us to cast night spells from our graveyard. Liliana, Untouched by Death, does the same with zombie spells, and Deeproot Historian, yet again with Merfolk and Druids. This isn't meant to be an exhaustive list. There are a lot of cards like this. These are intended to let us recur our creatures, but not all of them actually specify that we have to cast creatures. There are a variety of instant and sorceries that have the now largely retired Kindred card type, which allows them to have creature supertypes. In simpler words, Tarfire is an instant that's also a goblin. Now, most of these cards have creature types that are maybe a bit too specific, but there's a cycle of changelings within them, and those work with all of this recursion. Nameless Inversion, for example, is a 2-mana black instant that gives a creature +3/-3. Usually, graveyard recursion for instants and sorceries sees the card exiled after they were used, but because cards like Hakon assume we are playing a creature, they don't have that line of text, which means we can cast Nameless Inversion as many times as we want to. We cast it as removal, it goes into our graveyard. There, it's a night in our graveyard, meaning we can cast it again. We cast it, it kills something, it goes back into the graveyard. It's a removal engine that requires no resources other than mana, and if we're playing a type-specific deck, we probably have some mana cost reducers anyways. Combine it with a Herald's Horn, a Crick, Son of Yawgmoth, and some life gain apparatus, and we got an infinite removal engine. While that's the dream, the best card of the cycle is probably Crypt Swap, which is a white 3-mana exile spell. Unfortunately, the only commander with a white identity and a fitting recursion ability is Horde of Notions, which isn't like the strongest thing you could be doing, but it's alright I guess, it's funny. More reasonably, for your next Kindred deck, if you play type-specific recursion already, try fitting Crypt Swap or Nameless Inversion to have a nicely reusable piece of removal. A powerful creature type that doesn't have anything to do with this are ninjas. Ninjas rely on the ninjutsu mechanic, which lets us put them into play already attacking by paying the ninjutsu cost and returning an unblocked creature we control to our hand. Interestingly, there are no other timing restrictions on ninjutsu. So long as the creature is unblocked, which is true for the entirety of combat past the declare blocker step, we can ninjutsu. This introduces an interesting interaction with first strike. Since first strike damage is a separate step during combat, we can use a first strike creature to deal combat damage to our opponent and then ninjutsu it out during the regular damage step to have our incoming ninja also deal damage, creating a sort of pseudo double strike. Since ninja decks tend to be aggressive, we do really want to maximize every bit of damage we can deal, and little things like this might make a difference. Or they might not. It's cool nonetheless. Also, I'm not telling you any more fun facts about ninjutsu. There are a couple more, but I don't want to, because I don't want to play more against Yuriko. Be gone, Yuriko! Be banished! Thank you very much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I would definitely appreciate that. And let me know if there are any more cool tricks that you might be interested in sharing. This is the kind of knowledge that I always greatly appreciate because it is mostly useless, but also sometimes really cool. Like, I mean, come on. Killing your own Valakut exploration to keep the cards around is sick. That is sick. But you know what else is sick? That's right, it's time for our regular end of video nonsense. Today I have this for you. Now you might be like, Baumi, what the fuck is that? Well, I told you that I was working on a board game, right? And I actually just today got the cards for my prototype. It's my prototype. I have the whole thing. I have a little rule book. I have the cards. I have all of the other game pieces here. I will not explain it. I'm not explaining this right now. I can show you some of the cards. Yes, they are using Bloomborough artwork. Yeah, I just stole that shit. It's fine. It's a prototype. We'll eventually have to make proper artwork for it, but not today. And I'm just very proud of it. I just think it's really cool. At some point, I will probably show it off more than this. But for today, we'll leave it at that. I gotta keep you dangling a little bit, keep you interested. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys soon.